Welcome to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, where we talk about historical drama series and films as windows to the past and mirrors of the present. I'm Michonne Boston.
And I'm Tequina Boston. What can the film adaptations of August Wilson's plays tease out that can't be seen on the live stage? As we approach the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States, how do we better understand American history through August Wilson's plays? What does the film Sinners hold in common with August Wilson's plays? In this episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, we explore these questions and more with Dr. Sandra G. Shannon, who's widely acknowledged as the leading authority on the award-winning playwright August Wilson and a major scholar in the field of African American drama.
Born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1945, August Wilson penned 10 plays that make up what's called the American Century Cycle. The plays tell the story of the African American experience in the 20th century, decade by decade. Put them all together and you have history, the playwright once said. The plays were not written in chronological order. However, they range from 1904 with Gem of the Ocean through the 1990s with Radio Golf. Each play opens a window into the lives and histories of African Americans in the 20th century, including the formerly enslaved, domestic field and factory workers, and the next generation of entrepreneurs. Wilson's plays were produced at regional theaters in the U.S., Broadway, and across the globe. He won numerous awards, including the Pulitzer, a Tony, and a New York Drama Critics Award. August Wilson died of cancer in 2005. His legacy lives on in performances of his dramas, his native Pittsburgh, and the institutions that bear his name, dedicated to celebrating arts and culture.
Academy Award-winning actor Denzel Washington optioned August Wilson's 10 plays from the playwright's estate and announced his commitment to produce each of them as a feature film adaptation. 3 films have been produced to date. We highlighted 2 film adaptations in previous episodes of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. In episode 62, nearly 1 year to the date of this podcast's release, we talked with Costanza Romero, August Wilson's widow and executive director of the August Wilson Legacy, LLC, about the 2024 film adaptation of The Piano Lesson. Set in the 1930s, The Piano Lesson takes you inside an exploding family clash over an heirloom piano. In episode 7, we talked about the film Ma Rainey's Black Bottom as part of a tribute to the late Chadwick Boseman. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom reveals the history of the recording industry and the exploitation of Black musicians in America through the power struggles and tensions over creative control and compensation between the blues singer Ma Rainey, trumpeter Levy, and the record producers. We also talked with Dr. Shannon about Fences. Set in the 1950s, Fences centers around a sanitation worker, husband and father, Troy Maxson, who's hardened by the frustration of being denied the opportunity to become a professional baseball player because of his race. Fences won August Wilson a Pulitzer Prize and was adapted into a feature film in 2016. According to reports, the next film is Joe Turner's Come and Gone, which is set in 1911 in a boarding house in Pittsburgh's Hill District at the start of the Great Migration. Harold Loomis is haunted by the memory of the bounty hunter Joe Turner, who illegally enslaved him and kept him enslaved for 7 years.
We begin our conversation with Dr. Sandra G. Shannon. Dr. Shannon is Professor Emerita of African American Literature in the Department of English at Howard University. In 2006, following the untimely death of August Wilson, Dr. Shannon founded the August Wilson Society at Howard University and served as its president for over a decade. She is the author of The Dramatic Vision of August Wilson and August Wilson's Fences, a Reference Guide. Dr. Shannon is the editor of August Wilson's Pittsburgh cycle, Critical Perspectives on the Plays, and Modern American Drama, Playwriting in the 1980s, Voices, Documents, New Interpretations. She also served as co-editor of August Wilson and Black Aesthetics. Dr. Shannon's prolific publications include numerous peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters on African American drama and dramatists, including Amiri Baraka, Lynn Nottage, Alice Childress, Adrienne Kennedy, August Wilson, and noted director Lloyd Richards. Dr. Shannon is currently President Emerita of the August Wilson Society and Dean Emerita of the College of Fellows of American Theater, having served with distinction in both roles. Her current focus is completing Centering and Celebrating Wilsonian Warriors, a book that profiles the village that shaped and supported August Wilson. Welcome, Dr. Sandra Shannon, to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. Let's start with you and your introduction to August Wilson. What was the first August Wilson play you saw, and what were your first impressions?
I believe that there's no certainty to this because I didn't document the date. But when I think back on my introduction to August Wilson, somehow Fences comes to mind. And it certainly helped that Arena Stage, the Washington, D.C. Regional Theater, is a friend of August Wilson and has done all 10 of his plays. So I vividly recall being in the front row watching Fences. I think it was in the late 80s, I want to say. And Yaphet Kotto was playing the role of Troy Maxim. And I recall he was very passionate. And I've got to say, I've never been that close to the action, Michonne. I could see the sweat, I could see the spit, I could see the dust kicked up on the stage. But that memory is vivid in my mind. So I believe it was Fences. And I'd seen quite a few of August Wilson's plays, as well as Joe Turner's Come and Gone, Jim of the Ocean, Piano Lesson at Arena Stage. So that was my local viewing spot. As well as, when August was alive, he would invite me to some of the Broadway premieres of his plays.
Yeah,
but it was Fences.
Now, let me go back and maybe come a little further in over the years, because you and I met at Howard University years ago when August Wilson came to the College of Fine Arts to meet with the students and talk with the students. And you just talked about Fences. And that was when he was talking about playwriting. And he said to the effect that writing Fences was to prove to himself that he could write a straight play, however he defined that. How do you interpret that statement, and why do you think writing Fences as a straight play, or writing the straight play, was important for August Wilson?
Yeah, but first let me give a little bit of context to that event. Wow, we go way back. I just want to say that. That event was on Howard University's campus in September of 1995. Right?
Oh, my God.
Yes. And it was the occasion of the publication of my book, The Dramatic Vision of August Wilson. August Wilson knew I was writing the book. I kept him informed about its process, the publication process, spoke with his assistant, and we worked it out so that August, as well as Costanza, would be our guest for a day on campus. And there were two sessions. There was a morning session and an evening session where and Al Freeman was the chair of the department, the late Al Freeman, and he was very instrumental in that as well. But back to Fences then, Fences was written on the heels of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, right? Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and I think it was a time when critics, you always have your critics who will find something negative. They will find something negative. And August Wilson sort of quietened them Because with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, the running critique was that, first and foremost, it was not a musical. Took them a while to get over that. They thought it was going to, when they paid their money to go to the theater, they thought it was going to be Ma singing from beginning to end. It wasn't that. And secondly, they couldn't quite understand who the lead character was or is. Was it Ma? Is it Ma Rainey, Gertrude Pridgett Ma Rainey? Or is it her disgruntled trumpet player, Levy? Such as it is. So they beat August up in the theater. I mean, theater critics. They beat him up on that point. And I think August sort of had fun with it. I don't think it really discouraged him. And it's so interesting because having just read How I Learned What I Learned, I got a sense of August's character. He's a fighter. He's a boxer. You come at him and try to beat him down, he will trump you and come back. So I think, matter of fact, I know he said this in an interview, that because of all the flack that he got, because Ma Rainey had so many characters and none of them rose to become an obvious protagonist, and that's okay. But they beat him up on that because, of course, he didn't follow that quote-unquote straight play, that well-made play that Western tradition is so steeped in. And so and at that time, August accepted a bet from his circle of friends. Okay, so you don't think that I can write a play about a single character and making it about a single character and raising that character to the level of a tragic figure. Hence, Fences. So he writes Fences, and it's unquestionable that the protagonist of Fences is Troy Maxim. The other characters, Troy's wife, Troy's friend, Troy's son, Troy's mistress, they sort of orbit around Troy. And he writes it in such a way that Troy is introduced as a complex character, multi-dimensional character, a character that we hate, but we also love. In other words, he's human. So yeah, I think that he was having a bit of fun with it. And that's how he responded to the critics, by writing a better, well, not better, but that's a relative term, but writing a play that would demonstrate the range of his talent. He could write an ensemble, right, with multiple characters, but at the same time, he could write a play in which there's one central character that has so many levels of complexity to him that, he becomes the focal point. So, yeah.
And it's a relatable character for so many people. I mean, who doesn't know a Troy? I remember sitting in the movie theater in the movie adaptation with Denzel Washington and Viola Davis and hearing the audience just react to so many things. Or he would say something and my friend next to me was like, my father used to say that all the time. I love Fences. I mean, if you may want to call it a straight play, you may want to call it a simple play. It's a good play. It's a good story. It's relatable.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, and I have witnessed that kind of call and response that I think you're referring to, that play elicits, especially in the scene where Rose decides to keep the baby.
Yeah.
There were a lot of angry women in the audience, and they let it be known. And at the end, when Gabriel blows his horn, somebody said in the audience, you don't need to blow it because he's going straight to hell. You don't need to open those gates up. And, it was that kind of call and response that the audiences loved it. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to interject something because even though right now our museums are closed in D.C., there is an exhibition at the National Gallery of Art on the Black Arts Movement. And interestingly, one of the aesthetics of the Black Arts Movement in theater was the ensemble. I remember the director, Glenda Dickerson, may she rest in peace, used to say, there are no stars here. we are an ensemble. So to hear that someone like August Wilson would write plays where the critics have a hard time figuring out who's the lead is kind of funny when I think about it. It's kind of amusing because it's a different aesthetic, right?
And August marched to his own beat. And his aesthetic was, for the most part, informed by Africa, right?
Right.
So, and you have multiple speakers. It's not just
Yes.
one, you have a village, if you will. And I'm
Yes.
thinking specifically in terms of Joe Turner's Come and Gone, and where you have a set where people are coming and going, a ready-made set for an ensemble. People are coming, people are going. You have a people finder, for heaven's sakes. He goes out, brings lost people, finds lost people. So yeah, I think while August does say in The Ground on Which I Stand, he stands on the shoulders of some of the Greek playwrights, he's clearly his own man. It's a both and situation. He feels like he doesn't really owe them a lot, although he does acknowledge them.
That's ironic, too, because Glenda Dickerson used to adapt Greek plays and put them in African settings. So here we go. You are also an institutionalist. You are a founder of the August Wilson Society, which I believe the founding date was 2005 after August Wilson's death.
It was the spring of 2006. August passed away. In fact, this very month, October the 2nd of 2005. And at that time, I believe I was an assistant professor in the Department of English at Howard University and a quote unquote rising scholar.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I had not gotten tenure. And all those things converged. My interest in August Wilson, I found him as a wonderful topic. I was very curious about him. But yeah, so when August passed away, I was just beginning, I had begun to publish, and I had begun to organize conferences on the campus of Howard University, the first national conference on August Wilson's work. In other words, there was a lot of activity about August Wilson prior to the founding of the August Wilson Society. So when August passed away, it was a no-brainer for me. It was, we're going to do this. And fortunately, the administration at Howard agreed. And so in April of 2006, and April is symbolic as well for August. He was born April, I believe, of 1945. So in April of 2006 to August, not long after he passed away, the August Wilson Society was founded on the campus of Howard University. And we continue to thrive. It's a nationally known organization. And our mission is to keep August Wilson's legacy alive and in a way to advance my professional through line, and that is to get August Wilson's plays taught, keep them in the classroom, get them into classrooms, facilitate getting August Wilson's plays taught to a whole new generation. That's been my motivation as a scholar, because when I began to publish on August Wilson, theater critics, had begun to write about his work, but his work had not trickled down into the classroom, the textbooks. Of course, I was biased. You have to do this. You have to do this. So I sort of leveraged my reputation and used my scholarship to create a bridge from Broadway to the classroom. Yeah.
And is the society, it's now national, and is it going to be
International.
Well, I guess so. International. Is it now like rooting itself in Pittsburgh, his hometown?
I don't know whether I say rooted, but it's sort of organic, Taquina, that Pittsburgh is sort of like ground zero.
Right.
Not only for August Wilson's American Century Cycle plays, but also what the August Wilson Society does. Since I have been doing research on August Wilson, it has become a hub of activities around August Wilson. August Wilson's house was renovated, beautiful space. If you know anything about the history of August Wilson's house, it was a very modest place in the lower income section of Pittsburgh, Hill District.
Mm-hmm.
Find lots of photos of the before picture, but now it's absolutely gorgeous, and I think it's used as an arts center. There's a lot of activity going on there. You have also the August Wilson African American Cultural Center, also located downtown Pittsburgh, does wonderful work. Connected to August Wilson, but also African American culture in general. It sponsors jazz festivals. It has artists, galleries displaying their work, musicians, arts and craft dancers. Then there is the August Wilson Archive, which is housed at the University of Pittsburgh Library System, which was bequeathed there by August's widow, Costanza Romero. And that's a magnet in and of itself for scholarship. The archives, been there several times. I think that Pittsburgh is ground zero for the August Wilson Society. However, there are a number of other cities in the United States where August has left breadcrumbs. Chicago, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Not just because Ma Rainey's Black Bottom was set in Chicago and what Chicago represents, but for the Goodman Theater, for example, is a theater that played a very important role in, introducing August to the world, essentially workshopping his work. The Court Theater, there are a number of theaters where August Wilson's works got an airing or got a viewing early on. So yeah, Pittsburgh.
I know Baltimore seems to be planning to do maybe all of his plays over a certain period of time.
Baltimore is more than planning. Baltimore is about midway.
Okay.
From doing all 10 of August Wilson's plays. It started with the Chesapeake Shakespeare Theater. Her name is Leslie Malin, brilliant woman, reached out to me. And I got to say, for some reason, people reach out to me trying to connect me with the August Wilson estate. So that has happened on a number of cases. I don't mind. But she reached out to me and put her idea forth. Of course, I just don't do everybody, but she let me know what she had in mind, and I introduced her via email to Costanza Romero, and the idea just took off. And so, of course, the mission of the Baltimore project, August Wilson, it's wonderful because the idea is to create a community among theaters that I dare say would not, know each other or collaborate. So it's that going on as well. I think the last play was The Piano Lesson. I saw it at Everyman Theater. But, if you think about it, Baltimore is like Pittsburgh.
Yes.
It is very similar. The demographics of Baltimore are very similar to Pittsburgh. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it worked well. Not to mention that August's daughter went to Morgan State University. There is a Baltimore connection also.
Didn't know that.
His oldest daughter, Sakina Ansari, is a graduate of the illustrious Morgan State University. And I think August Wilson was a keynote speaker or something at some big event. I don't know whether it was her graduation or whatever. But Baltimore, and then August would come to Center Stage. Matter of fact, I interviewed August at Center Stage in Baltimore. So Baltimore was a good space for him in that regard as well.
Yeah, and in this environment, we're encouraging people to support their local arts organizations and historical organizations and cultural centers, etc. So glad that we could mention a number of places where folks can
That's right.
find August Wilson, but also support
I think
local
that's
arts.
a wonderful idea. There are a number of theaters throughout the country who can brag on having done all 10 of August Wilson. That's bragging rights.
Yes, it is.
To say one theater has done all 10 of August Wilson's plays. And I do believe that the August Wilson House created an award, and they would travel to that theater and present the award to the artistic director who has championed all 10 plays on the stage. So that's quite an undertaking. But the interesting thing about the Baltimore project is that it's all around the city, all the theater. And, one of the things that comes out of that is that people didn't know that there were that many theaters in the Baltimore area. And we're talking top-notch theaters as well.
Yeah. Sandra, we were talking offline about what you were planning to be teaching, coming up this year or next year. And two of the plays are Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and The Piano Lesson. And those two, in addition to Fences, have been adapted for the screen. Are you bringing these films into your classroom to teach the plays? And why not just have the students read the plays?
I think
we're not against that.
No. What I'm saying is that, and I think those in the teaching profession would agree with me, in this day and age, you bring it all. We're dealing with a different student, type of student, media savvy, tech savvy, but they got to read, though. They got to read. So it's not an exchange. It's not a substitution. Howard University, the Department of English chair, Dr. Carol Boyce Davies, reached out to me. And of course, Dr. Shannon is Professor Emerita at Howard University.
Congratulations.
Thank you so very much. But in my capacity as Professor Emerita, she invited me, knowing that I am an August Wilson scholar, and she felt the need and continues to feel the need that August Wilson should be taught. So she invited me to teach a special topics course, and this on August Wilson. And this fall semester is the second time that I will have taught that course. It's fascinating. I've not been in contact with young people in that type of setting. One never knows how one will be received. But I think that August Wilson is a perfect topic to galvanize their interest. And I do know that to keep that interest, you have to do something more than just have them to read and talk about the text, especially that they know that these plays exist in another realm, another platform. Yes, and it's interesting that you asked that question, because just yesterday, I ended a discussion of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom by incorporating the 2020. It was smack dab in the middle of COVID. That it came out in 2020. Viola Davis as Ma Rainey and the late Chadwick Boseman as Levy, and several other very familiar characters, very well-known characters made up that ensemble cast. But absolutely, and it doesn't hurt that Viola Davis knocked it out of the park. No pun intended. No play on fences. But she knocked it out of the park in her role as Ma Rainey, because that play, of course, the only play set in Chicago, but that play also, we talked about August Wilson's portrayal of Black female the Black female. It gave me an opportunity to talk about the blues, the history of the blues, right? Where August Wilson is telling the story about the kind of contentious evolution, one step forward, two steps back, of the evolution of Black music, the blues in particular, in the persons of Levy and Ma Rainey. The clash between those two individuals is comparable, and this is what August is telling the story about the evolution of blues, is comparable to, what Levy calls that old jug band music, the kind of music, the moaning and groaning, those early sounds, field hollers, etc., of the blues that go back to the origins of the blues, to a more, I want to say, commodified. When promoters realized that you could make money and that these blues singers way down south, illiterate though they may be, they can play the blues. When they realized that they could make money, that became a popular trend, that the largely white promoters would go down south, places like Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, whatever, in the backwoods, and recruit often illiterate blues singers on the promise that they will become a star. So that story had, and of course, August knew that story. In fact, he wrote a precursor to Ma Rainey's Black Bottom entitled The Homecoming, in which he talks about a real-life blues singer named Blind Lemon Jefferson, who was a victim of just what I explained. He was an awesome blues singer, illiterate, and blind. And he was lured up north. They got his song on record. It was in the dead of winter, and they did not even afford him a ticket back home, and he died of exposure.
No.
Turned him out, and he died of exposure. So this prompted August to write the play Homecoming, where he sort of turns the tables, and the friends of this blues singer, I think they beat him up or kill him or whatever, the promoters. Yeah. So it's exciting to bring the film to the classroom. However, I'm very careful to balance it, and let's be honest. If you just bring the film, don't be surprised if you turn around and kids are on their laptops. Somebody's head is on the desk sleeping. Somebody is texting somebody. I mean, realistically, I think responsible incorporation of the film is an excellent teaching device, but I do so sparingly, and I juxtapose it with other teaching strategies. But it's very helpful. And I say because at some point, we began to talk about the text and how the play illuminates. And that's the beauty of George C. Wolfe as director of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. The decisions that he made. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom in August Wilson's hand is set in the dead of winter. Viola Davis comes in perspiring. Turn on some AC. But that was a decision, and I had an opportunity of George Wolfe, and I had an opportunity to ask him about that. And it's set in March, if I'm not mistaken. The play is set in March. And both of you, I'm sure, have been in Chicago in March, right?
Yes, indeed.
It is cold.
Cold.
Even though it is the month of spring.
The
March
wind coming off the lake.
Absolutely. So I asked George Wolfe about that. And of course, I guess you call it sort of freedom.
Creative license.
Creative license, yeah.
Like creative license or whatever. But he was going after the emotions in a sort of like a tinderbox, that heated small space about to blow up. with all that heat. So that was what he was trying to tease out with setting it in the summer months. Of course, Mom still comes in with feathers.
Oh, yes.
But she has a fan. She's sweating. But yeah. And so we teased that out, but there were a couple of scenes I really appreciate how the movie version, not just of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, but the piano lesson as well, and I'll give you an example in a minute, how some of the stage notes and some of the interactions that kind of go over our heads are teased out in the movie version. I'll use an example from Ma Rainey. When Viola Davis, playing Ma Rainey, comes into this restaurant with her nephew and her lover, Dusty May. She is dressed to the T's. They all are fashionable. She grabs them and she pulls them close to her as her support. I think that's a powerful scene. And we talked about that, how her entourage served as her fortress, as a buffer for her. So being able to see that, we could jump off into a discussion on that and then ground it in what the text says. So the director is basically interpreting or lifting up things that are intuited or implied in the text. And with piano lesson, I was particularly impressed with the scene when Boy Willie was a little boy with his dad.
Yes, yes.
When they're walking in the field and he bends down and he picks up a handful of dirt and then let the dirt fall through his fingers. I have always valued land. This is Dr. Shannon talking now. I've always, and I think my father instilled this, my mother and my father instilled this in me, the importance of land ownership. And that was not that was not in the script. What was in the script was Boy Willie's long speech about if my daddy had some land. Remember that?
Yes,
If my daddy had some land. And so what he's doing in the piano lesson is trying to advance his father's wishes, right? With that piano. I'm going to buy me some land. But when as a little boy, and by the director doing that, I believe it was Malcolm Washington, Denzel Washington's son, but his older son, John David, played Boy Willie in the piano lesson. But I think that the idea was to to demonstrate how deeply ingrained that was in the boy Willie, the young boy Willie, and how it kept throughout the years. It never left him. The importance of land ownership. Those are just two examples that I think the film, there are another, and also with the piano lesson, and I got to tell you, this sort of went over my head initially, that they got that piano on the 4th of July. That kind of went over my head with the fireworks and everything. People are distracted. I'm not sure why I missed that. But the movie version made that quite clear.
Absolutely,
and at the same time,
it was liberation.
Absolutely. They were preoccupied with fireworks. They were getting that piano. That provided cover for them to retrieve that piano. So yeah, I think, and we talked about that as well. So things like that, especially instances in which the director unearths or goes deep and brings to life things that are subliminal or suggested in the script.
Yeah.
And both Ma Rainey and the piano lesson were still in the music lane, in a sense. And
Absolutely.
the impact of music, because another scene I love in the play and in the film is when the men start singing that, what was it, Chain Gang?
Berta.
Yes.
Yes.
That was done very well in the film. And with Ma Rainey, we've talked about Ma Rainey on this podcast because we were focusing on Chadwick Boseman, whom we knew when he was a student at Howard.
Right.
And another thing that George Wolfe did that I loved was the beginning of the film. We see so many films where people are running from something, especially if it's African Americans in the past. I'm like, oh God, what are they running from? The posse, the hound dogs or what? But they're running to something. That
also,
tent.
Yeah. Wonderful. Sort of bait and switch kind of thing going on there. Now, I believe Ruben Santiago wrote the screenplay. Ruben Santiago-Hudong wrote the screenplay for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. And I did get an opportunity to talk to Ruben about that. That was his idea to open the scene with that running.
Yeah.
The two boys running.
Mm-hmm.
Just for the very reason that you explained. Because, you talk about that. Oh my goodness, there is some Netflix film now where it opens with, what's her name? Keke Palmer is running through the woods. Is it Alice, maybe?
I think it is Alice, yeah.
And the opening scene is she's running, as a slave, she's running. So I think we are conditioned. You're absolutely right. And it's beautiful how it flips. That those two young boys that are running through the woods, and I think dogs are barking, the whole scenario of the escaped slave syndrome here, but they're running toward a tent. And before they get inside, this is another important thing that Ruben pointed out. He says those people were in line and they had money in their hands. They were paying to see Ma in that tent. And that's where the real life Gertrude Pridgett Ma Rainey performed in tent shows. And so there is the commercial aspect. All of this comes, you got to go back and rewind it and look at it again. But there's commentary also on African American people supporting their own culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, ultimately in the film, the white promoters, Sturtevant and Irvin, representing, those who co-opt the culture and commodify it.
Yeah,
So
it was the first play I read. And
Ma Rainey?
exactly, of August Wilson's. And exactly what you said, what I got out of it was about the business of music and African American music.
And a consummate businesswoman. That's another thing. She paid the band members. They worked for her.
Yes.
And this is the point that my students, we were talking about, the life of the female blues singer, especially in the early 1920s. And we talked about 1927, you got the Harlem Renaissance is going on. You got the jazz age going on in the 1920s. But now you've got Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. And you see it's kind of a different scenario. The jazz age, that world depicted in F. Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby, the flappers, the millionaires, new money, that's going on at the same time that in 1927 that Ma Rainey is set. And this is how African American blues people, and I would argue by extension, the African American masses were oppressed similarly. So, yeah.
You've been enjoying Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, a podcast where we talk about historical drama films and series as windows to the past and mirrors of the present.
Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Share the excitement with your friends. Visit MichonneBostonGroup.com/Boston Sisters. Join the historical drama community by signing up for our e-newsletter so you'll never miss an update, future episodes, or exclusive bonus content.
Now, back to our fascinating conversation. We're deep into history in this conversation, and In 2026, the United States is marking the 250th anniversary of technically the founding. We're talking about the Declaration of Independence. And last year, when we spoke with Costanza Romero, which ironically was around this time as well, Costanza is August Wilson's widow. She underscored that Pittsburgh is more than a setting in Wilson's play. She called it a microcosm of what was going on in America. And so with August Wilson, we've got his American Century Cycle, 10 plays set in 10 decades. And they're showing primarily African Americans as the primary protagonists with an S. Are there threads that tie these plays together thematically? And at the same time, are there distinct aspects, messages, commentary that he's making about the experience of African Americans in each decade? And what do those reveal about the history of the larger United States? I know that's a lot, but his plays are a lot. It's like, I mean, each time you go to them, it's like you pull something else out, just as you were doing with the piano lesson and with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and Fences.
Well, I think, again, going back to Pittsburgh, the representation of Pittsburgh, the symbolism of Pittsburgh, and I think Costanza, Mrs. Wilson, was absolutely correct in referencing it as a microcosm. And again, you have to credit August Wilson for writing about the ground on which he stood. That phrase, very familiar phrase. The metaphor ground permeates his work. He's writing about that which he knows, his experience, his people who society has deemed to be insignificant, whose stories have not been told by themselves, whose stories have been hidden or misrepresented. The phrase or the sentence, he gives voice to the nameless masses. He gives voice to the nameless masses is very important. And also, one of the things, not one, but in my conversations with August Wilson and the many interviews that he granted, in fact, there have been interviews collected in a book called Conversations with August Wilson. He has been consistent in articulating his mission. No inconsistencies. He says, and I quote, often he said, I want to place this culture on stage in all of its richness and fullness, and to demonstrate its ability to sustain us in all areas of human life and endeavor, and through profound moments of our history in which the larger society has thought less of us than we have thought of ourselves. The mission, that's his modus operandi. That's what undergirds his writing. And I would encourage people, in order to understand perhaps a better response to your question, a fuller response to your question, I would invite people to go and read the one-man show, How I Learned What I Learned. It was written and performed by August Wilson. I believe it was in 2003 in Seattle, the Seattle Repertory Theater. In that work, August Wilson really explains the genesis of his stand, his aesthetic, his thinking, his warrior spirit. That warrior, you asked me about the thread that runs throughout the cycle. Warriors. That is, he defines as people who will stand up against injustice, regardless of the consequences. There's one particular episode that students laughed at, and I began that Wilson class. Students began with the ground on which I stand, and then we segued to the one-man show. There was one particular instance in that the published version of the one-man show where August Wilson, as a young man, picking up money cutting grass. He cut grass. And he worked for this gentleman, and they would go out into the neighborhood of some of the more affluent areas, and he would cut grass. And one day, a white lady came to her door, and she was yelling something, and August had the lawnmower going. He turned it off, and she was telling him, "Get off my lawn, get off my lawn." And August said, "No, but he told me to cut your grass." And rather than his employer letting the lady, putting her in her place, he told August to go cut somebody else's grass. And August said, "No, no, no, you told me to cut this grass." So there are several instances in which he talks a principle. His principles, you see them in this work. This is what his beliefs are. And in another instance, got a job in a toy store. And the guy, his employer said, "Okay, I'm going to hire you, but if I catch you stealing anything, I'm going to shoot you." August responded in a very colorful manner that I don't think I'll repeat here. He said, "I quit, MF." And he walked out, and he realized, like, he didn't have a way home. He was like 4 miles away from his home. But it's the principle. And you see that in Levy, for example. You're going to stab somebody for stepping on your shoes, right? And some of his warrior figures do things maybe cathartic. They feel good for the moment, but is it really in their best interest? Again, going back to how I learned what I learned, August Wilson at one point was very fond of the work of Guy de Maupassant, the short story writer, the fiction writer, Maupassant. And he was particularly fond of Maupassant's depiction of characters who stood for honor, who would challenge a perceived foe to a duel. And August liked that kind of thing. That really attracts. And so you see in so many ways how these things, this was August talking about his early life, how I learned what I learned. But you can see how those things work their way into the American century cycle. There is the fight for justice. Even if you are somehow mentally challenged, if you have a plate in your head, half of your head is blown off, right? If you are stuttering, if you're on the other side of society, right? You stand up, you fight. And so you see that thread. So it is the fight for justice and also the nobility, that he's writing to demonstrate the nobility in African American existence. And again, back to Fences, for example, he writes Fences in such a way that he raises a garbage man to the level that we care about. You know, he's not perfect, but we care about him. He resists against, lifting garbage. He sees the injustice of the white drivers in an air-conditioned cab while the black garbage collectors lifted and hoisted stinky, filthy garbage into the truck. Troy saw that. He couldn't read, but that did not stop him from going and complaining to his employer. And so, in an interesting twist, they granted him what he asked for and made him a driver. The fact that he couldn't read and didn't have a license, irrelevant. Yeah, I think there's a big connection there. But it's the justice the nobility, and sort of like unconditional resistance.
Mm. This is interesting because it's also reminding me of the tradition out of which folks like Langston Hughes was writing about everyday people who
Exactly.
still had nobility. And I remember interviewing Owen Dodson, who talked about the importance of lifting up the honor and the nobility of everyday people, another poet, playwright. So we're seeing both continuity and change in the works of African American playwrights and writers over time. Now, I also watched a YouTube interview, and I was really interested in what you had to say. You said that August Wilson's plays could be used to teach history, and I agree. However, here we are in 2025 where there are controversies regarding language and content and concerns about how history is taught, particularly in high school. What guidance would you offer high school teachers about bringing August Wilson into the classroom? And I ask this because when Michonne and I saw the piano lesson last year in the theater, the public relations professional who was giving out the tickets mentioned that he'd read the play in high school.
Kudos to his teacher.
Amen.
Absolutely. So my response, 3 words, just do it. And I'll tell you how I do it. When I teach August Wilson, as I'm teaching it now at Howard, I spend a day or two with historical context. I don't want to teach it as we read it. I want students to imagine, if you will, go back with me. Let's set the milieu. Let's set the stage. And by doing so, with the piano lesson, for example, which goes back to, we talked about Pullman porters, for example. Doker Charles' role as a Pullman porter. You got to talk about, because that's relevant. You talked about the Berta Berta. We talked about field songs, work songs. Parchman's Farm, which was a recurring penal institution. That name occurred in several of August Wilson's plays. It's sort of like a reform school, a place, I pause because I'm thinking, August Wilson once said that just about every African-American man he knows, thinking of in Pittsburgh, had been to jail. It was like, it's not if you're going, it's when you go, right? So the prison industrial complex is also very powerful in August Wilson's plays. Several of his characters have just been released after having spent years in prison. So that is a factor. So there are many opportunities to press pause and teach history. And I think students will be made the better for it once they get into the play. Now, a play such as Joe Turner's Come and Gone, if you come to it without historical context, especially students, and if you're introducing them to that play, I think you will do a disservice to them by not talking, for example, about the Great Migration and what was going on there, because it is a lesson in history. 1911 in this country, what was going on? And we do the math, and I think August Wilson was brilliant in many ways, but another way is the age. He lets you know in the stage notes the ages of characters, say, for example, in Joe Turner's Come and Gone. And so you do the math, and you see that some of the characters were born into slavery. Some of them are old enough to have known what it was to be a slave or witnessed the aftermath of slavery. Or they also witnessed the Reconstruction, the aftermath of the Civil War. They know that. They know of which they speak. And I think it would be great to spend some time talking about the Civil War and its aftermath, because that's where Joe Turner's Come and Gone is set in 1911. And although the piano lesson is set in 1936, right smack dab in the Great Migration, even though August Wilson doesn't give a nod to the Great Migration, we know it's going on. It's important to talk about the piano lesson within the historical context of the Great Migration. My colleague, Dr. Long, used the word, what does he say, hovering. He said history hovers over these plays. In other words, August Wilson doesn't take it on directly. It's understood that this is going on, right? It's understood that these characters, they don't have a lot of money, but I'm thinking of Raisin in the Sun, for example. They don't have a lot of money, but there is honor and there is nobility. And they're principles. They have principles. And so I think it's important to talk about from whence they came. And as I said, Doker was a Pullman porter. Boy Willie and Lyman, they cut wood. That's how they sell watermelons. That's how they make their living. So, these are the people, the salt of the earth kind of people that August Wilson populated in his plays.
We talk about people and August Wilson's characters. Let's talk about the supernatural. Some of his plays, and I bring that up because, Sinners by Ryan Coogler was such a huge hit this summer. And even when we watched it, as I was watching it, I couldn't help but think of the piano lesson, which I had seen and even read before. And there is some supernatural elements to August Wilson's plays. I think of the piano lesson, Aunt Esther and Jim of the Ocean, who's a spiritual advisor to an extent. Joe Turner has a conjure man. Who is that, Byron? Or is
Bynum.
Bynum. Yeah. Compare, contrast with Annie and Sinners, and even Delta Slim talks about meeting the devil on the road. That's the blues folklore. How do you see the supernatural operating in Wilson's The Piano Lesson compared to Coogler's Sinners? In some ways, I felt that Sinners borrowed from August Wilson. I don't know about you.
I'm not getting in trouble. But it tells a similar story, though, Mashawn. I couldn't help but see the parallels. And you use the term supernatural. I'm sort of wrestling with that because there are a lot of other things that are going on, especially when you think about the film version of The Piano Lesson as well as Sinners. I've heard the word horror. Horror was introduced. But I'd also consider magical realism,
Yes.
metaphysical, metaphysical, and I would say Afrofuturism.
Okay.
I would add that ism into the mix as well, because in my understanding of that is that it relies upon a sort of like a supernatural in order to imagine or to create a world that transcends the current oppression, right? And I think that's what Sinners is doing. And it does so beautifully. But I also think in plays like Jim of the Ocean and Joe Turner's Come and Gone, I keep talking about those two because I think they're in a different category. And I think it's because they are the early plays. And I think the lens that August is looking through is backward to our history. And he's trying to tell an epic story. The word epic comes to mind. He's trying to tell a very large story through the use of individual characters. I remind students that August was particularly adept at doing that because he's grounded as a poet. Adept at the figurative, being able to communicate figuratively, personification, those kinds of things. Joe Turner's Come and Gone, on a literal sense, right? And again, this goes back to your earlier question, Taquita, about history. That Joe Turner was the brother of the governor of Tennessee, Pete Turner. So it's grounded in the specifics of history, right? And the women would sing this song during Reconstruction when white farmers needed labor. Slavery is over and the labor source is gone. So they would kidnap able-bodied African-American men and put them to work on their plantations. This happened. This was not something August Wilson made up. But that's how he worked history into this epic story that he's telling. So he's telling the story about how this song came to be. The title of the play, like Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, also the song, a title of a song. Joe Turner's Come and Gone was a song that the women, the wives, the sisters, the daughters would sing when their male relative, in the absence of their male relatives who've been kidnapped. They have no idea where they are, but they suspect that they've been taken by Joe Turner. So you got to tell that story. You got to tell that story.
Just like these vampires and sinners.
Absolutely.
It's a horror.
It is horror, but it's a good point. Very good point. But I think the very connotation of vampire makes people think horror. But Coogler is doing something brilliant through the use of vampire. He's telling that large story through the use of those vampires. He's talking about commodification, theft.
Back to Ma Rainey.
Theft, yes. Theft of the culture. Just let me in. Just let me in. Why you want to come in? That's been made into a meme, Just let me in. But everything in Sinners, and I need to watch it for maybe a third time, I would argue, similar to the story that August Wilson tells in Joe Turner's Come and Gone and Gem of the Ocean, and to a certain extent the Piano Lesson, is a large story. In Sinners, the story about the evolution of Black culture and Black music, dance, music, etc., and the threat of it being stolen and commodified and turned into something not recognizable, right? That's a powerful theme there. And I think it's a storytelling device. I think the supernatural, the metaphysical, the magical realism, the Afrofuturism, I think all of those are devices to tell a large story about the arc of history, right? Using specifics, characters, particular incidents. These twin brothers, right? On a mission, like the Blues Brothers. They were on a mission from God, right? They were on a mission in that. And so also the afterlife, how it sort of complicates our notions of the afterlife. That's where the vampires come in. It's beautiful. When they are bitten by the vampires, they transition, right? And I do think, what is the woman's name again?
Annie?
Annie, yeah. When she's bitten, she tells her friend, what is it? Don't save me or something like that. She tells him, yeah. So that's her way to escape. So I do think that I think, well, first and foremost, you have to bring something to the table. You have to think. These movies, Sinners, and I'm so happy with the reception that it got. And I'm one to read the comments. I see the comments on Facebook and Twitter or whatever. I love the comments because what I gather is that people got it. But then, of course, as always, some people don't get it. But I think a lot of people understood the storyline, the narrative in Sinners.
I would say the cultural piece was attractive to me, and I got it because of August Wilson. I know he said and other playwrights.
Fair point. Fair point. I completely agree with you. And, Michonne, there's no way, good and well that I was thinking of Ma Rainey while I watched Sinners.
Absolutely. Yes.
I couldn't wait to talk about the parallels, the blues musician, the story of the blues musician, also the Black church, too.
Mm-hmm.
The role of religion in all of this, another aspect of culture, which was sort of teased out there. And the beauty of Black family, the Black family came to the forefront.
I want to thank you, Dr. Shannon, also for reminding us that August Wilson started as a poet.
Yes.
And that you see that influence in his plays as well. As you said, the figurative and how he uses language.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. He can turn a phrase so beautiful. It's beautiful.
So, Michelle, I think you have the last word on the questions.
Okay, sure. Dr. Sandra Shannon, if you were producing the films,
the next August Wilson, because we know Joe Turner is happening.
We know Denzel Washington is driving this bus.
Right.
But what would be the next play you would adapt? I understand Joe Turner is in development now to be the next play.
They have their cast all picked out. Taraji P. Henson. I just learned that Ruben Santiago-Hudong is going to play Bynum. I just heard that. Yes. But, and this is an inevitable question. I kind of figured you would throw this. But you know what? Out of sheer curiosity, I would love to see Gem of the Ocean done. For the fact, the City of Bones.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen Gem of the Ocean done. I think Arena Stage did Gem of the Ocean. Did a wonderful job. And I think each director, I think I've seen it several times. And in both instances, the directors had a different take on how they bring to life the City of Bones, how that manifests on a physical stage. We talked about the metaphysical. How does the metaphysical, in other words, how are you going to approximate the middle passage on a stage before an audience? And the middle passage, what is it, the Atlantic Ocean and the bones sweeping up on the shore. But I do know that in today's theatrical universe, you have such things as screens in the back. Mm-hmm. You can have running, images
CGI,
in the back.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm just curious, especially the scene when Aunt Esther takes Citizen on a trip, a voyage with that boat, that paper boat to the City of Bones. And if a director does that well, then kudos. But I'm looking for that. I'm here for that. How are you going to do that on stage?
On film?
Yes. But, I think film would probably be easier to do. And I'm thinking about the piano lesson. And there were scenes, Michonne, in the piano lesson that I only imagine in the text. For example, Sutter falling down the well. They actually showed a big white man falling down the well. Then they also showed a scarred face, Sutter. There's the horror. Bloody face, dragging Boy Willie, down the hall. I don't know whether that was TMI And I ask my students that, do we need to see that? Or is it enough to imagine this great big man holding his head, like it was going to fall off, what the text tells us. But in this case, with the piano lesson, they made it graphic. I did have an opportunity to interview Malcolm Washington. The August Wilson Society had got permission from Netflix to incorporate several scenes from the piano lesson in a kind of a talkback, a virtual talkback last fall, conducted with now the late president of the August Wilson Society, Michael Dinwiddie, and myself. But in that video, in that session, I asked Malcolm Washington, questions about the decisions that he made in bringing that to the stage. And I was curious, I was wondering whether was it with the audience, the contemporary audience in mind, thinking that the contemporary audience, like my contemporary students, needed a little bit more because they are so savvy with the media. But then how much is too much? That's a question, open question. You certainly want them to be able to use their imaginations. So I guess a conversation was had between Malcolm and others. So should we bring this to life, or should we just let it stay within the text, within the words, within the dialogue, within the stage notes, or should we bring it to the stage?
Now, these are very complicated times with so much emphasis on being able to read the visual media. I've heard it compared to the days when people who could not read, or when books were less available, learned the Bible through the stained glass windows and the paintings.
Can I answer that question just from my perspective? I think for the medium, it became a ghost story at that point. We knew something was rocking around that house upstairs, so we had to see the ghost.
Right.
But at the same time, we had to see the people to come to the rescue, and that was the ancestors. And for some reason, and this is a spoiler, for some reason, seeing the ancestors show up brought tears to my eyes. I still get tears to my eyes just thinking about it.
That's a good point. They did have flashes over the piano. There was Yes.
And as someone who does acknowledge the protection of the ancestors, of my own ancestors, that was an important moment for me. And that's why I see that he brought the ghost, the spooky ghost, into the frame so that you could see what are we fighting against and who is here to protect us. That's just my opinion.
Right. And it also advances August Wilson's, not just August Wilson, but the African belief system, that the ancestors, calling upon the ancestors is the way to go. It's just second nature. You do that. And if you don't do it, it's tantamount to sinning. And that's what Bernice had not done. So I'm thinking, Mashawn, as you talk about the very first version, the CBS Hallmark Hall of Fame version.
Oh, yeah, I saw that too.
Where the presence of the ghost was felt with the flickering of the curtains, with Charles Dutton pretend to throw himself down the steps. I bet a lot of fight choreography went into that.
Yes.
But I think Malcolm sort of squashed that and just showed the encounter between Boy Willie and Sutter's ghost upstairs. But that's a good point about the ancestors. In the final scene, just reading the text, she's just banging on the piano, calling the ancestors. That's it. So, but also those ancestors have been referenced through the carvings on the piano. So Bernice takes a lot of time explaining the significance of each of those carvings and Mama Ola polishing and the blood and all that. She does that in the text. But I agree with you, seeing their faces, flashes of their faces. And in a way as well, in going back to Sinners, seeing all of the beautiful art forms, African-American art forms influenced by Africa converge in that one room.
A Sankofa.
That brought me to tears.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It was a Sankofa.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Sandra Shannon, thank you for joining us for this. We could talk about this for another hour, but we won't.
Call me.
Okay, when Joe Turner comes out, we know who to talk to.
Yeah.
I am so looking forward to that. Absolutely.
And thank you for joining us on Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. And let's have another conversation when Joe Turner comes out.
It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Fences, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and The Piano Lesson, based on the plays of August Wilson, are available for streaming for a fee and or with a subscription. Do a search for streaming platforms. Also, check your local public library. You can purchase plays by August Wilson and books by Dr. Sandra Shannon from our affiliate bookstore. Go to our webpage where you'll find the bookstore link. Your purchases from the affiliate bookstore support historical drama with the Boston Sisters and independent booksellers. Thank you for catching this episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. We hope you enjoyed our exploration of captivating historical films and series dramas. Find us on Instagram at Historical Drama Sisters and on Facebook at Historical Drama Boston Sisters.
We want to hear from you. What historical dramas are you watching? Share your favorites. We may feature them in a future episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Visit our website at michonnebostongroup.com/Boston Sisters and share the podcast with fellow historical drama enthusiasts.
Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters is brought to you by the Michonne Boston Group. The views and opinions expressed on Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters are those of the speakers and do not represent the positions or views of the Michonne Boston Group, its clients, or affiliates. This is Michonne Boston.
And this is Tequina Boston.
Thank you for listening.